Hard time. Mega Man is being held captive by Dr. Dreary until an explosion. He's finally freed from his cell, but he's far from safe. Caught in the middle of a jailbreak, Mega Man must fight through the crumbling facility, racing against this becoming his permanent prison.
All right. Hello. My name is Paul Bazak. I will be going over my level in Mega Man Builder, Hard Time. When I was first making this level, one of the first questions I had to ask myself was, what did the player need to know to win against the boss? So, in this level, it's assuming that this person has never played Mega Man before, and this is their very first exposure to the game. So that means that the player needs to be proficient with shooting, jumping, and sliding by the end of the level. In terms of the aesthetic, you're supposed to be in the middle of this crumbling facility that's in the middle of a big jailbreak. And so there's going to be two color themes throughout. There's going to be this red, which is associated with explosions, and there's going to be this darker blue, which is associated with the facility itself. So that's just the initial prison area. But now you can look right here. This area right here is a safe way to introduce the player to the concepts of destroyable blocks and explosions. By introducing the player to destructible blocks and explosions in this way, it ensures that they don't necessarily get stuck in this room because they can't figure out that this block is supposed to be destroyed. And on top of that, it introduces both of these mechanics, which are going to be used again in the future. So, sliding along to the next section, we have our first enemies. And they're just really basic, something very easy to help get the player familiar with shooting at enemies. Very low stress. And so these cracks in the vents, for right now, are actually just flavor, but they're ultimately going to become an obstacle that the player has to go up against. So, dropping down this air vent, we come across this scanner. This guy is completely harmless, but it's just supposed to give the player the feeling that they're constantly being watched throughout the level. Next, we go over here, and the player has their first encounter with this turret bot. Its head flies up, kind of like one of the silver bots that's introduced right over here. And that allows it to serve as a threat, like one of the largest threats the player has come across so far. But it also introduces it in a very stable environment, so they can really get used to jumping and shooting at the same time. So next, after another forced intro to sliding, because sliding is an extremely important part of this entire game, being able to beat these bosses. Ideally, by the end, player should feel proficient with sliding and jumping, because bare minimum, that's what you need to get past them. So next we come over to this area here, where we've got this clustering of enemies. And this is supposed to be, the first time you're actually dealing with multiple enemies at the same time, and like a good variety. That's, that rising tension, easing them in. And next we get to the first sort of very, very easy version of a steam puzzle in the vents. And the very first one is extremely low stress, basically only implying that suddenly now you'll be able to touch that thing and that you probably don't want to. And then the next one's far more open, where if you're not safe, you will take the damage. And there's an enemy there to just sort of chase the player around, give the impression that this place is constantly under watch. Moving on to the next section, even more enemies clustered together, but not too many enemies. These guys are very passive. They're just sort of basically walls down here, and they don't harm the player without the player harming them. So they're really more just an obstacle than an enemy. And they do serve a purpose down here. If the player is really low on health, they can try and go for this health up item. But overall, the main feature, the main enemies of the zone are just these guys along here. And as you can see, here's the different color themes. Ideally, these guys would be blue, but the only option is red, so they're on the explosion team. So next, we move on to the vent area immediately after this. And here we have a combination of needing to jump and shoot and this harm mechanic at the same time, finally. And so this will serve as the first actual challenge to the player. This guy at the end here is one of the largest challenges that they're going to face at the start, where they need to just balance on this one platform and take him out. In most playtest sessions that I've seen, after the second or third time this enemy is taken on, they are able to be defeated with the player having almost no health left, and that's very ideal. It creates a great feeling of tension, but it doesn't make it feel ridiculously unfair. So next, we get over to this checkpoint, and this marks the beginning of the vent section. So we are forced down with a fan right here, which sort of teaches the player that those fans can really affect direction. We have some missiles coming in, and we see just a little bit of rubble coming off of them, which will be relevant later as it can be used to target the player. So now the players down here, they see another explosion, which chases them off screen, and the high tense, the action keeps building, the pacing's still there, explosions constantly coming through this facility. And so you are chased further and further into the vents, destroying these destructible blocks while sliding underneath the obstacles, taking out enemies in the way. And you're just gently guided along by these fans the entire time. After we get through this major sectioning of the vents and all of this, we come to a jumping puzzle where fire is introduced, as you can see right down there. Where a player, once they're in this section, has no real clue that there are fans down here, so that they're actually safe. It really feels like a high-stake jump, so they might get really nervous and like maybe mess up, but you know, the goal isn't to punish them. The goal is for them to have like fun. If they die to the fire because they fall in the pit, and like, I mean, they can get out. No matter what happens, they can get out of these pits. It's designed so that the height is proper. This section in playtesting was way too difficult. And so one of the largest issues was that once people would be hit by a fireball, or when someone was hit by a turret, they just fall down the hole, and it really just got aggravating very quick. So instead of that, now it's way more forgiving, allowing the player to experiment more with this feeling of moving along and jumping in a tight place. And then here, ideally, they can get the feeling of slide jumping a little bit more. This also has an enemy that'll move toward them for the first time, adding another, like that 1, 2, 3 spin type of feeling. You know, introduce them to a concept, get them comfortable, show that they've mastered it, introduce the spins here, you know, that's the ideal way to do it. So, the reason why I'm introducing people to fire in this section is that there's a massive explosion that's going to be coming up here. Yeah, right here. It's going to be chasing the player up the screen. So this is really a prelude to that entire section. The mechanic of the fire spewing like this doesn't really come into play again, but I just sort of see it as a natural extension, a natural, you know, precursor to this zone. So finally, you work your way up the shafts, get to the checkpoint, get back down. Now you're in another section. You're back in the danger zone. And so you can see now the facility's crumbling more than it was before. Everything's caving in all over the place. There's a massive explosion chasing you out. Tension is very high. So you hop on the vent and you work your way through this. There's shrapnel and explosions all over the place, placed ideally in nice places where it doesn't feel ridiculously unfair to the player. Ideally, you're able to work your way up here with enough time. Playtesting has gotten the impression that it should be doable pretty easily. You know, maybe 1 to 2 deaths before successfully really being able to reach this top and using the fan to hop into the next section. One last sliding jump into the next section where you really have a break after that high intensity area. And this is sort of a nexus for a few different boss fight options. So right over here to the right, we have this Jumpman. He just jumps and is very beefy. And so he's just protecting a little Easter egg. It lets you get back over to here, take a peek at your old room, see how far you've actually come. You've gone full circle, just a little. It's a satisfying feature to me in games when they do something like that sometimes. So I just was looking for a way to include it. So after that, though, there is this one little hidden section here. And personally, I was very torn about including 2 bosses in a single Mega Man level, because Mega Man traditionally only has 1 boss at the end of every level. But the story was about, in my head, these 2 conflicting sides. So the 2 bosses for each of them made a lot of sense. But instead of them being required, this one's just it's a side boss, This is the leader of the exploding people. He's about to finish destroying the facility fully. You come in and you stop him. And so then you're able to gain his power. It's not extremely useful against the final boss, but it's a fun something for the player now that they've made it through all of these trials. So how do you get that? If you're very observant when you're running up through this fiery hell, or alternatively, if you just choose to drop back down, you can find this key right here, and that will allow the player to access the side boss room. Finally, if you choose to ignore this optional boss and see this Dr. Dreary's special secret bunker, you'll instead go upward here and be faced finally with freedom, fresh air, almost there, just a fence in between you and escape. And so finally you get over to here, the final section of the fence, and here is who I see as Dr. Dreary. And this is actually just Hard Man, but to me he's got the nice steel, hard aesthetic of a prison guard almost, or like someone who would be holding all of these people within his facility. And so you take him on and you beat him, and that's that.